But when you talk about pedagogy or theater of the oppressed, it seems so much to be focusing on having the oppressed people coming up with their own solutions, which is a brilliant idea because it is, in a sense, anti-colonial, like emphasizing people's own agency and own ability to solve problems. But nonetheless, a lot of people are not from the communities and they are somehow professionally trained or well aware of this kind of issues. So what is the role of these people, the development professionals, the academic researchers, the experts, right? And so basically, I'm talking about us here. What would be our role in development, right? Can and how outsiders contribute their own knowledge apart from organizing, facilitating, and analyzing, right? So apart from just organizing the theater, can we also contribute our knowledge in terms of solving that the situation without appearing too imperialistic and appearing respectful all the time? So if you remember, we just talked about post-development in our previous lecture and how it is really focusing on the local culture. But it also gets a criticism that this is not as simple as local versus global. It's not either pro or anti-development. Every ideas kind of mutually influence each other. So you cannot really have one without the other, and it's not really an antagonism. So similarly, I think knowledge is not simply local or expert, right? That should be an exchange of knowledge that mutually influence each other. And there's where grounded knowledge comes in. Grounded knowledge is an idea by a paper published by Ashwood. So grounded knowledge, according to the paper, differs from the usual participations in four main points. Number one, it really emphasized the equal validity of knowledge, whether it is expert, local, or otherwise. And it's asked to situate the knowledge in a context with active informational exchange. So it's not about local knowledge being more valid, but how do you situate both expert and local knowledge in a context so that you can have information exchange surrounding this context, right? And then it leads to creative encounters as knowledge is linked through new connections, right? Because you are grounded them in a particular context and you can debate and connect this different kind of knowing around that context. It will produce creativity and new solutions. And then scholarly focus on local and expert can lead to a disregard for the diversity of context. So basically what it means that not all local knowledge work for all local contexts. And then the situating knowledge in a context is really inspired by Donna Haraway's situated knowledges. So Donna Haraway's work is kind of really popular among social scientists, especially those working on qualitative research. So basically, her idea is that everyone produces partial visions, including scientists. There's no so-called universal knowledge because every knowledge has something that it is blind to. And so instead of universalizing the scientist's position and dismissing other ways of knowledge, and scientific knowledge should be taken as situated knowledge itself. So instead of saying that, oh, science is the truth, everything in every context in different countries should follow this so-called scientific knowledge, it is admitting itself to be situated, to be produced from a particular context, maybe from a laboratory, maybe from a particular field site in a very specific place in the world, even though it's under control experiment. So to recognize that even scientific knowledge are situated knowledges, and all knowledges are situated knowledges mediated through bodies and senses. So scientific knowledge are produced through scientists' bodies, through their senses, their eyes for observation, their smelling, their measurements, their categorizations. Partiality and not universality is the condition of being heard to make rational knowledge claim. So basically, Donna Haraway is advocating for us to accept all knowledges as situated knowledges. All knowledges are partial and not universal, but we must listen to this kind of partial knowledge because they are equally valid for us to make rational knowledge claims. So grounded knowledge extends scientific self-awareness to also include local self-awareness, right? So in the beginning, Haraway, when she made this argument, she was particularly targeting scientific knowledge to make them to have more humility. But we should also extend this self-awareness to include local self-awareness. So there are various actors, various knowledge and power relations, even within a local context. So prioritizing local knowledge itself is insufficient because it is always boiled down to whose knowledge we are talking about. So a quote I've taken from the article is, locals can marginalize other locals and experts can marginalize other experts. So grounded knowledge actually pays attention to negotiate the differences and also its relation to the specific context for meaningful engagement and dialogue, right? So again, it is emphasizing dialogue just as pedagogy of the oppressed. It's just pedagogy of the oppressed encourage dialogues among the oppressed, but grounded knowledge encourage dialogue among different parties, including expert policymakers, of course, including local communities. For knowledge to actively link through dialogue, it must also be situated. So we must be specifically talking about a context in order to exchange this knowledge, because if we are talking about things that's applying to different contexts, then we are not really having a very meaningful accumulative way of information exchange. And any knowledge holder who is able to situate their knowledge can link with others through dialogue to produce meaningful deliberation in the participatory space. So Ashwood were discussing their methods. So they start from local level to expert level. So they were working on a project, a participatory action research that's talk about how to resolve the problem of non-point water pollutions. So first they went to the local communities and farmers and they asked them to vote on the best strategy to control non-point water pollutions. And then after these deliberations, they put forward the most voted strategy to academics and policymakers to deliberate in terms of how do they implement them. And then they went on to describe how some attitudes and some institutions are more conducive for grounded knowledge, while the others are not. So this is the table I've taken from the article. So basically, if you are in an institution that's adaptive, that is willing to be flexible to work around the people, you are more prone to contribute to grounded knowledge. But on the contrary, if you are in a rigid institutions, if you think that admitting the failure means that your positions, your employments would be insecure and threatened, and you don't want to recognize a problem in the first place, that would make grounded knowledge real difficult. They also talk about identities. So some people have situated identities and some people have universalized identities. And the situated identities people are very aware that they only know from what they know about their surrounding, which is equally valid. So they want to actively contribute their perspective to the other people. But the universalized identities people thinks that everyone is the same, or for example, in the article there's a farmer who dismissed all academics and all policymakers, thinking that they are all the same and useless. So he didn't want to cooperate with these people. So these universalized identities became an obstruction for grounded knowledge. And then of course interest, whether you view these things as shared benefits or view this as disproportionate burdens. For example, once you talk about point water pollution, maybe some farmers will immediately think that, okay, this would become a burden to farmers because farmers are always thought to be the one contributing to this. So if you have this mindset, instead of thinking about, okay, what can I gain by having a better water, then this will also obstruct grounded knowledge conditions. Okay, so when we talk about collaborative approaches, participatory action research, we have many institutional barriers for collaborations. These are part of the reasons why we have problems with participatory approaches. For example, who set the schedule? Who set the schedule to do collaborative research? who determines the participants, right? And who controls the products, and who gets the funding. So all these questions are institutional barriers for true genuine equal partnership collaborations. And also one question is, what if the researchers and participants have very different ways of understanding and all knowing? So they have different epistemology. So how do we communicate with each other? So this is especially true when you are talking about participants who are very different from you, maybe from a different country or a different religion, different cultural background, or maybe they're indigenous people with totally different way of understanding the world. So I also give you a reading by Stanton on decolonizing methodology, and I think this is directly speaking to some of this problem. In this article, the four R's were being highlighted. So you should have respect. Time commitment must be manageable for participants. Relationship between native and non-native participants need to be long-lasting and trusting. Native participants should engage in all phases of project. So this is the definition of respect. You don't go in, do research, and you leave, but you spend as much time as you need to accommodate everyone to participate. And also you build this as a long-term relationship that you will keep coming back, right? And then relevance, community interests must direct the project designs and implementations. Oral history, storytelling, and dialogue should guide the project. Meaning making should be guided by native community members. So basically, you prioritize the agenda or the interests of the community you are working with, as well as their methods, right? And then reciprocity, share results with teachers, school leaders, community members, and teacher educators. Project process should promote learning, healing, personal change for all participants. Findings should lead to practical change to school and communities. So basically, the products of your research finding must have an application or must have benefits towards the bigger community. And then responsibility, project design must center upon tribal protocol. So it must include what the tribe's procedures are, what do they care about, what do they prefer you to do, what do they prefer you not to do. And then non-native scholar participants must share control of the project with native participants. Stories must be shared in appropriate ways. So I have also taken this table from the same article to talk about epistemological differences. What do we actually mean by epistemological differences? So basically how our participants, native participants, will view knowledge very differently from how academics view knowledge. For example, native people have unique history and potential as demonstrated through oral history, ceremonies, visual arts, and so on. But from the mainstream academic perspective, they don't have any written texts, they don't have large-scale studies, so they are sort of deficient in terms of knowledge. And then for the native people, experiences are best shared in a dynamic, interactive, and face-to-face context. But in the mainstream academic, experiences are best shared in professional context through written form. And for the native people, stories are complex, lengthy, and circular in order to connect multiple experience and to promote deeper understanding. But the mainstream people wants you to be on point, to be clear, to concise, and chronological, so that it could be very clear for linear thinkers. And then meaning making is collaborative, and all participants can contribute in the indigenous epistemology. That for the academics, credential experts are best prepared to make meaning of experiences and stories. And then for the native people, subjectivity, emotion, personal and collective experience, and multiple perspective are valued. But for the mainstream, it is the reliability, validity, and trustworthiness, dependable researcher objectivity, or per participant to participant consistency. So you don't want a messy data. You want very clear cuts, things that multiple people have said. So you don't want to collect one person's emotions as part of the knowledge. And then for the native, stories are powerful and in some cases cannot be told in certain contexts. And for the mainstream, to promote education, stories should be shared with the broadest possible audience. So these are some of the differences of epistemology. And if you want to be mindful about decolonizing methodology, especially working across different kind of epistemology, These are some of the guidelines. And there is a whole literature of decolonizing scholarship, decolonizing literature in the web if you're interested in that. Okay, so my question is, do you agree with Ashwood that all knowledge, either local or experts, are equally valid? Why and why not? And the second question is it possible to balance knowledge contribution by experts and knowledge decolonization?